Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, really glad to have you here with us. It's a big honor for us to be here talking to you about a very important subject, that's ethics of artificial intelligence, and a specific instrument that we have to promote ethics of artificial intelligence around the world. My name is Irakli Kodeli. I'm the head of the Ethics of AI team at UNESCO, and with me we also have James Wright, who is member of our team, and we work closely together trying to promote ethics of artificial intelligence. What I want you to know, that around 3 years ago, the world came together to decide what they wanted AI to look like for the future. And this was really something significant. For many days, sometimes nights, representatives of 193 countries, these are member states of UNESCO, were hammering out a framework of ethical governance of artificial intelligence, something that would guarantee a positive AI for us and the future generations. So it was adopted by 193 countries, this framework, and for the last 3 years we have been implementing it through different tools and methodologies. And the simplest way to describe for me this instrument that was adopted, it's called UNESCO's Recommendation on Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. It's a normative instrument, so to say. The best way for me to describe it is that it's a roadmap and a blueprint to where we want to be in terms of AI serving humanity instead of the other way around, us serving the interests of AI. This is if all the countries in the world manage to follow this blueprint, then we will make sure that AI is doing all the great things that it promises us to do in terms of, solving complex socioeconomic problems, helping us achieve SDGs, helping us deal with really difficult environmental issues, etc. So the big question really is, can countries turn this recommendation into reality? The recommendation itself is based on values and principles. These principles, I think that you're all aware of. This is about transparency, this is about responsibility, accountability, this is about do no harm principle and proportionality. It's about safety and privacy of people's data. And then the recommendation also contains, very importantly, 11 policy action areas. So we're not only talking about what the values and principles should be, we're also indicating exactly how these values and principles can turn into specific policy actions. So this is an indication. This is something all countries agreed on. But as I mentioned, the really big question is, can we really turn this into reality, or will it just remain as a high aspiration for the countries? For us at UNESCO, the key determinant of the answer to that question is how we help countries turn it into the reality. And this is where specific tools and methodologies come into the picture. And that brings me to the actual topic of today's conversation, which is the readiness assessment methodology. And this is one of the fundamental tools that we have developed at UNESCO that we are deploying in countries around the world. I believe the current number is 58, and we're really proud and excited that Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is one of the countries that is currently putting this into practice and applying the readiness assessment methodology. So with that, I'd like to sit down first and turn to James. James has been leading the implementation of the readiness assessment around the world, and ask him, James, what do you think are the interesting experiences that are emerging from around the world when we're talking about the readiness assessment? And perhaps you want to explain a little bit first what the readiness assessment is. And
Sure. Okay, thanks. So I think a key thing to note about the recommendation on the ethics of AI, as you said, Irakli, is it is about values and principles, but it's not just values and principles. If you remember, a few years ago, there were literally hundreds of companies, organizations, international organizations coming out with loads of sets of ethical principles. And that's really important to form the kind of basis for the type of AI that we want in the future. But it can't just be ethical principles. It has to be, the actual concrete policy actions, policy recommendations. And that's why the recommendation document doesn't stop with the ethics. It also continues with 11 different policy chapters with very specific things that member states, that governments can do in order to develop AI ethically and responsibly. So the readiness assessment methodology directly comes out of this desire to actually implement ethical AI, not just to talk about principles. So the readiness assessment is an AI readiness assessment for countries. Consists of different dimensions. In a sense, it's like a really long questionnaire with different sections. It has quantitative and qualitative questions. It's asking about, what's the country's score on this index or that index. And it looks at 5 different dimensions. It looks at the economic aspects of AI, so things like what's the level of investment in AI in a given country? What is the labor market like? What's the skills market like in a particular country? What is the consumption around AI products and services? So you've got the economic part, you've got a legal and regulatory part where you're asking questions like, what laws are in place? And it's not just about, do you have an AI law? It's also things like, do you have data protection law that takes into account the implications of generative AI, for instance? It's asking about cybersecurity. Has your cybersecurity policy been updated in relation to AI? Does it cover AI-related issues? We also have a dimension that looks at the educational scientific area. So it's asking things like, what's the number of patents per capita related to AI? What's the number of publications? What is the policy for digital education or the use of AI in the education system? So it's really looking at all of these different dimensions in a really comprehensive way. And it's important to note that it's not it's not a kind of freestanding, like, okay, we answer some questions and that's the end of the exercise. It's part of a process of implementing the recommendation. So we start off by asking, these questions, gathering the data about each country. We move on to do a multi-stakeholder national consultation, where we go out and ask different groups, different parts of society, what are the political priorities and what are the concerns around AI? How should AI be governed? And then all of this is synthesized and put together into a report with really targeted, evidence-based recommendations for policies to update national AI strategy in the particular country. And the idea is that every country is on its own journey. Every country has a different level of readiness across all of these different dimensions. But we have one instrument, which is the recommendation on the ethics of AI. That's the vision that we want to get towards, and this is the pathway that we are going towards.
Thank you very much. James, can you give us an example of a country, for instance, where we have deployed the readiness assessment methodology that led to the certain recommendations, and perhaps these recommendations have been also been acted upon.
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched the RAM, the Readiness Assessment Methodology, last year, and we're still in the relatively early stages of implementing it. So one thing that we found is that countries are really enthusiastic about this. I mean, we've had, we're up to 58, actually 59, I think, at the most recent count, countries that are implementing the readiness assessment. Many of them are still in the data gathering stage, or they're kind of drafting the final report. But a few countries have actually completed the whole exercise and have started to implement the policy recommendations that have come out of it. So, for example, Chile was the first country to complete the RAM. They launched it in the presence of the president of Chile earlier this year, and they've already enacted legislation relating to cybersecurity and critical infrastructure that was directly informed by the recommendations from the RAM report. They've also put an AI bill, a comprehensive AI bill, to the legislature that also follows on from the recommendations. In many countries as well, this RAM exercise goes alongside an existing process of updating national AI strategy or developing a new one. So in a number of countries like Senegal, Morocco, Uruguay, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, like this exercise, bringing together experts, bringing together different parts of society, taking an evidence-based approach to policy making, has accompanied that development journey of the National AI Strategy. So we've directly fed into the strategies that are emerging in those countries. We're also working with Mozambique, for instance, who've put together a full kind of program of how to implement the recommendations from the RAM report.
Thank you. Thank you, James. I believe that to continue the conversation, it would be, we have 5 minutes for the conversation. Wonderful. So, and then after 5 minutes, we'll also open the floor. We would love to hear questions from the audience. But
maybe
go ahead.
So just to mention on the side of implementing, so we do this exercise of gathering the data, doing the multi-stakeholder consultations, publishing the report. And then there's a question of like, what happens next? So we have the country report. Yeah. It's a question that often comes up from the audience in these sessions. It's like, okay, you have a report. We get loads of reports. Like, what are we going to actually, how do we actually implement? And I think implementation is the key question for governments at the moment, because I don't think any country has figured out how to, actually implement the policies and laws that are coming down the pipeline. Even with the European Union, who we work with their working group on for competent authorities on AI, which is a group of regulators in Europe that are trying to figure out how to implement the European AI Act. It's like, okay, the Act has been implemented, but how do regulators actually turn that into practices? How do they work out how to enforce it amongst companies? So we're working with them on that. So getting back to the readiness assessment reports and how we support governments to implement. So we have an expert group called the AI Ethics Experts Without Borders. And that's probably one of the most diverse groups of AI ethics experts in the world, because it's composed of experts that have conducted the RAM in all of the 59 countries. So, almost always it's a local AI expert who conducts this exercise, and then we enroll those experts into our group, our AI EB group. So we have resources to work with governments to say, these are our recommendations, and these are the experts who we can send, to work with you, to support you, to actually implement these. whatever it might be. So it could be, we have a huge range of expertise. We have over 100 experts from more than 50 countries, with expertise ranging from, drafting laws, the regulatory side of AI, data protection expertise, privacy expertise, through to things like technical tools like regulatory sandboxes or red teaming of AI systems. We also, through Saudi conducting the RAM, we're hoping to include Saudi AI experts in this group, and that's, I think, an ongoing conversation as the RAM in Saudi develops.
Thank you. Very quick question. When we're talking about AI, very often the image that comes to our head is the advanced countries, affluent countries, the so-called global north, countries of the Gulf where the resources exist. There's a huge compute capacity of the countries, etc. We also know that AI perhaps is just as important, even if not more important, as a tool for solutions for the so-called global south. How do you apply the same tool of readiness to highly advanced countries like the Netherlands, for instance,
Yeah.
and at the same time apply the same tool to a country in a developing context such as Timor-Leste, for instance?
Yeah. So this was a question that we really considered from the start when we were developing this readiness assessment tool. Obviously, we have to work, or we work with, a huge range of countries, 194 countries that are at many different stages of development in AI and in other technologies. So we went through quite a long, rigorous process to develop the RAM and the questions that formed a part of it. We didn't want it to be questions that were only limited to countries that could collect certain types of data. So for instance, the OECD collects loads of data in OECD member countries, but if you're looking beyond the OECD, sometimes those measures just don't exist, and we didn't want to create a tool that would exclude global majority countries. So we were quite careful in terms of which measures we included. We didn't just go for scores and rankings. We also went for qualitative questions, qualitative measures. And we also conducted a survey of member states to understand how they use existing readiness assessment tools and what they wanted from a new readiness assessment tool. And that fed into our development process. It's also a reason why the multi-stakeholder consultations are so important, because we don't just work from the questionnaire itself, although it's very important to have the empirical data. We also hold the multi-stakeholder consultations in order to understand and localize, like, what are the local issues, what are local concerns, and how does the local landscape relate to some of the questions in the RAM that may not be answerable in some contexts. So we do work with many different types of countries, but we feel like the RAM process is robust, and it's scalable, and it works across all of those different contexts.
Thank you very much, James. Let's move from our dialogue to the conversation with the audience, with perhaps putting big emphasis on the multi-stakeholder engagement. As you have mentioned, for us at UNESCO, that is of fundamental importance, because we believe that everybody's voices should be heard in this discussion. And it is precisely for that reason that we're really excited about the establishment of the category centers, but particularly the Category 2 Center of UNESCO here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the International Center for AI Research and Ethics, the head of which Dr. Habib just joined us in the audience. We're very honored to have you here as well. So, opening the floor to the questions that you might have. We'll come to you next.
Thank you so much. I have two questions. One is we know that using the AI in different areas has different implementation. So I'm wondering if the RAM, the assessment, has covering these different implementation for different. When we talk about, for example, education, has different implementation than what we have in military or we have in finance, for example. So I don't know if that's covered in the assessment. Second thing, what is the status of the AI in Saudi regarding this round? Thanks.
I think perhaps the second question might be a question for Dr. Habib. So perhaps, can we have a mic just at the front, please? Thank you. Yeah, if you'd like to perhaps go for that first.
Thank you very much for the question. I think to answer the second part about Saudi Arabia, we're already undergoing the RAM assessment in Saudi. We have almost done the assessment itself. We're working with UNESCO now on the evaluation and assessment of that methodology and also writing the report about Saudi Arabia. The report is a very comprehensive report, so it will go and cover through multiple areas, but maybe just to clarify, this report is about the kingdom rather than about certain organization within the kingdom. So it will cover a lot about infrastructure, about penetration of certain technologies within an adoption, but it will not go into the details of very specific sector and very specific things within organizations. Where UNESCO also have another tool that may be more focused on evaluation for specific organization. That maybe we'll talk about it later. And hopefully the International Center for Artificial Intelligence Research and Ethics, the one we announced just recently, to be a Category 2 center, will also carry some of that work on a regional level, but SEDAI also will work some on these activities also on a local level.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe just on the first question that you had as well. I think it's partly recognizing that there are different regulations, different government policies, different levels of investment in different sectors that will be impacted by and are already being impacted by AI, that we've have these different dimensions, including, for instance, a scientific educational dimension, amongst others. So we try, I think, to aim for a generalist view. What's the regulatory landscape in general across everything? Who's in charge, like which government ministries, which institutes are in charge. In Saudi, that's very easy because it's SEDAI. But obviously in many other countries, there are sometimes conflicts or multiple overlapping jurisdictions. But we also try to zero in, to some extent, sectorally, at least in the science and education area. But it's not, it's not going into each single sector separately.
Hello? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
So thank you so much, Professor Noor, Generative AI Professor. Thanks for the interesting talk. I have two questions, actually. The first one goes to what's the difference between the UNESCO Readiness methodology and the AI Global Index? And also there is one by Stanford, which also shows the rank of Saudi Arabia. The reason I'm asking because I'm aware of such a readiness assessment, and the pillars that you mentioned about the education, the investment, the infrastructure is already being covered in the Global AI Index, and it's been adopted by most of the country right now. So I would like to know the main difference between UNESCO and this one. That's number one. The second one, just to conclude and to understand, I think the readiness you guys doing right now, it's more like at strategic level, right? It's not like at the operation, or we can say it like it's a top-down kind of things, not like a bottom-up. And that's why what Dr. Habib said, you will have another version of the assessment where you can go by organization. Because for me as a entrepreneur or a leader, I would be more interested to see how can my organization, it's in the blueprint against the global, which is the target of Saudi Arabia right now, and also the local. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Really good questions, thanks. So maybe on the, how is this readiness assessment different from other ones? So I mentioned during the development of the UNESCO RAM, we did an assessment of what are the existing tools that are out there and looked at what exactly are they measuring. And what we found is that there is a big gap between what they're measuring and what the recommendation on the ethics of AI covers across all of its different areas. So quite often these assessments are very much focused on the regulatory and legislative dimension and also on the economic dimension. But there's much less on other areas which are also important in the recommendation on the ethics of AI and also in UNESCO's RAM. So for instance, the social and cultural dimension is a very important part of the UNESCO RAM, looking at all sorts of things from diversity measures. So in the AI workforce, for instance, what is the gender divide? How are marginalized people included in conversations around AI? Through to things like how is AI being used for cultural heritage preservation, which, with much respect to all of the other readiness assessments out there, aren't covered, and therefore they're not targeted to the need of UNESCO in order to understand the readiness in relation to the recommendation itself.
Yeah, I think amongst the differences also is that the global index, Oxford Insight, I think, is the one that carries that out. Very interesting one, and it ranks countries. We at UNESCO do not rank countries. We don't really find that useful, that approach very useful. We work with each country on the terms of that country, and we go very deep in analyzing what their readiness is and what. But for us, it's not very useful to say, country X stands here and country Y stands in relation to that country. It's a different approach of what we want to do with it, and so I think that's also one of the key differences. Now, you have mentioned another tool, and that's also Dr. Habib did. That's the ethical impact assessment, which we also developed, and that is targeting each and every individual entity, whether it's a private business or it's a government entity that is getting into procuring or developing AI systems, to help them understand, what is going to be the broader ethical impact of the decisions that they're making in terms of the AI. And I think that that's more in line with what you have articulated.
If I may add, I think in this summit, you will hear multiple announcements on that front, in specific for government agencies and also public or private agencies overall. So in the next 2 days, there will be a lot about the AI ethics. So when we implemented the AI ethics from the UNESCO, we tried to make it as practical as possible. What we did is we included the development life cycle. We mentioned the principles. This is the same principles from the UNESCO, but we mentioned the principles where in the development life cycle you will look at each of the principles, what type of questions you are going to ask, and how are you going to implement this. And to make it even more practical, we included something very similar to the readiness assessment methodology, but also for organizations. That will be like 73 questions at the end of the booklet. You can assess your organization. Moreover, we are not just throwing a document to agencies and asking them, you do it on your own. In the last day, we will announce the early adopter group. More than 20 companies already applied these questions, answered them on a specific AI products for their organizations. So we're hoping that more companies and more agencies, even government agencies, will apply to this assessment, ethical assessment. And maybe we're not looking into governance in terms of having more laws or more regulation in AI. The way we're looking at it, more incentive. So if you apply for these assessment methodologies, then you will be able to gain an advantage compared to other countries because you are aware of the ethical challenges and you're working on solving them in your product, not only the organization, but on your specific product, because products vary a lot based on the technology that they're using.
Thank you very much, Dr. Habib. I believe that our time has run out, and so thank you very much for your attention. James, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Habib, it's been a pleasure, and we can continue this conversation beyond this session. Of course, we'll be here for the next 3 days to answer any questions you might have and engage with you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.